Hola.
Hello. Doesn't mine go loud?
Okay.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, hello. Hello,
Hello.
everyone. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, we would like to thank those who are here with us on the last day and the last time slot of this conference, attending our panel. Thank you very much. We know that this has been very, very intense days, and we deeply appreciate your presence and interest in this crucial topic. Thank you. So for the sake of having more time to discuss and to listen your thoughts, because we are very interested in that, and your ideas and questions, allow me to present in a very general way our speakers. We are a group of academic activists and lawyers passionate about the intersection of international public law and the fight against corruption. For those who wish to learn a little bit more about our profiles, we invite you to visit the conference website or the conference app. So, the anti-corruption community has worked tirelessly for many years in developing regulations, criteria, processes, and systems of interinstitutional and interstate collaboration. This, of course, with the only objective of combating and preventing corruption. This effort has materialized or has been materialized in the creation of international non-governmental organizations, among other things, like Transparency International, that was founded in early 1990s, at the time when corruption was a taboo topic. Today, it's not anymore. And for that, we can say that we have advanced in this topic. We have a lot of advancements in this topic. But if we really want to emphasize about the advancements of anti-corruption, let's just recall what we have seen and what we have heard this week. The draft of laws and treaties and processes are no longer those subjects that dominate the agenda like events of this. Today, our discussion is even more important, and it is about how to improve regulation, how to make it more applicable and efficient, and above all, how to increase and enhance cooperation and collaboration among the various social actors involved in preventing and combating corruption. This week, we have the fortune of hearing continuously from prominent speakers in the plenary sessions and in workshops two words: collaboration and cooperation. Two concepts that have been highlighted as essential elements to combat corruption and its effects. For true cooperation to exist, it is crucial to know all interested parties, bring them to the table, analyze them, study their proposals, and provide them with recommendations and improvements, especially those that have not progressed at the same pace than others. This effort is even more critical when the protected good is the heritage of all humanity and the future generations, such as the seabed. The seabed is a common heritage of mankind, which means that two things. It cannot be appropriated by any country or individual or entity, and if it is exploited, the benefits derived from that exploitation must benefit all humanity. Although it seems that this topic has been extensively addressed in this conference and other forums, we believe that a crucial actor is missing from the table, from the discussion. One that is both judge and party in decisions related to the seabed. This is the International Seabed Authority. So without further ado, I give the floor to my colleagues, but not before thanking you once again for your presence at this panel and inviting you to watch this video. Thomas, can you help me with the video? That settles the context of what are we going to talk about.
Ese Pau que diga que están viendo.
Que si puedes empezar y decir como pues dicen él. Living, non-living resources, no sé. O explicar un poco qué están viendo. Dice.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
So, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much. So now I'm going to discuss a bit about what we just saw in this video. So what can we find in the seabed? In the seabed, as you see in this slide, we can find both living resources and non-living resources. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the sort of non-living resources that we can find. Now, what we have recently discovered is that non-living resources and living resources in the seabed form an ecosystem. To the extent where you exploit the minerals in the seabed, then you affect the living resources therein, maybe in a proportion that is greater than the non-living resources are being taken out. And in the next slide, we see why this is a bigger problem than anticipated. So in the next slide, what is happening, or what we see here, is that deep sea mining is now taking place in a part of the ocean floor that is beyond the control of all states. In legal jargon, we would name this the area. Now, at some point, states decided that it was convenient to regulate the activity in this area. And this is how, among other reasons, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas came to be. I will remark about 3 points in UNCLOS. First, it regulates the area in Part 11, which is, as we said, this part of the ocean floor beyond the control of states. But it regulates it in a way where resources, non-living resources, are predominant. Second, it foresees that the area, as Angeles was explaining, is common heritage of all mankind. And third, to make sure that this is so, it creates an organization called the International Seabed Authority. We'll return to the International Seabed Authority in a bit, but I just wanted to conclude this slide by saying that while UNCLOS may be the primary instrument regulating the exploration and exploitation in the deep seabed, it is also important to look upon other areas of law that might be relevant to this problem. For example, environmental law, human rights, anti-corruption, and transparency. Now, in the next slide, we can see that the International Seabed Authority is an organization based in Jamaica. And again, I want to touch upon 3 points of the ISA. First, It is a regulator of exploration and exploitation in the sense that it sets the rules and regulations to make this happen. But second, it is also an adjudicator of the contracts for exploration and exploitation of the seabed. And finally, it acts as a sort of umpire. So this impartial body that makes sure that the area is actually the common heritage of all mankind. And as we'll see later on, these three hats may be problematic. The last point on this slide that it is important to remark are the organs of the International Seabed Authority. The first two, the Assembly and the Council, are made up of states. But the next two, the Legal Technical Commission and the Secretariat, are made up by individuals in their personal capacity. These individuals are not supposed to have any financial ties to the activity that happens in the area. Lastly, I want to remark on this thing called the enterprise that you can see in the black box over there. The enterprise is actually an international company that is supposed to carry out exploration and exploitation in the area. It is not yet established, so right now the Secretariat is assuming its functions. So in the next slide, we touch upon an important point. Who controls the controller? So how can we make sure that there is accountability within the ISA? And this is the role that observers play. To date, there are 37 observers in the ISA. As for the NGOs, if you look upon the list, you can see that they are mainly related to environmental topics, mining, and academia. But what's missing in this list is NGOs that touch upon transparency and anti-corruption. And with the next slide, I give the floor to Jorge.
Thank you, Paulina. Well, once that there have been appointments and the organs are working within the International Seabed Authority, it's time to start making decisions. And this comes in two particular processes. First of all, there's the regulations that the International Seabed Authority creates. And then, in accordance with such regulations, the third step is that contracts may be awarded to states, to government bodies of the state, to individual enterprises or private corporations, and then the other person or the other entity that can carry out the mining activities is the enterprise. So let me start with the regulations. Up to now, the International Seabed Authority has issued 3 sets of regulations exclusively for the activities of prospection and exploration in order to know whether there are minerals in which areas of the seabed and whether this is financially viable. These sets of regulations have already been reviewed and they have been updated, and they consider, first of all, the polymetallic nodules. Then a different set of regulations are the crusts as well as the polymetallic sulfides. Now, according with those regulations, up to now we have 31 contracts that have been issued for each of those activities with regards to each of those minerals. But the mining code is not yet complete. We are missing the exploitation regulations. And not until there exists this set of regulations will the actual exploitation of these mineral resources will be possible. So no contracts have been awarded yet or granted yet to carry out this activity of exploitation. This full set of regulations will be known as the mining code. But there's a very important issue at stake right now. There's a timer, the clock is ticking. The International Seabed Authority has a time limit to issue these regulations because some of the exploration contracts are already coming to an end. So those who carry out these activities want to go to the next step. But there's a problem, and that is that there is actually a trend to pause the creation of these draft regulations. And in the next slide, we can see that there's a moratorium, which was an initiative from non-governmental organizations to pause, to stop and think whether there is actually an urgency to carry out exploitation of resources, or whether we have to look at the precautionary approach or principle under international law that goes beyond merely preventing environmental damage. What this entails is that we have to stop, and when there is a chance of severe or irreversible environmental damage, the lack of scientific knowledge is no reason to stop from taking decision and taking action. In our personal capacities, we are for the moratorium. We think that these activities may be actually irreversible, and we do have to stop and think whether this is viable. And if we go one step further, we can cross the listings of the states that endorse exploitation and are granting already sponsorship for contracts with those of small island developing states. This brings us back to the idea of looking at climate change and other issues of international law. But now it's time for my colleagues.
So I'm sure by this time all the experts in anti-corruption are going, wait a minute, how come you have the regulator and then the person that grants the permits and then he has an enterprise and it's all the same people? Of course, this is a problem. The thing is that we've never thought about the authority of the CBET as someone that could be corrupt, but it might be. And actually, we have had a couple of scandals already. If we look at the next slide, you can see this report from the LA Times where the General Secretary, Michael Lodge, has already been captured promoting exploration and excavation in the seabed. And what he says is, well, actually, the treaty says that it's part of my responsibilities. So this comes as a big contradiction. How come you're going to be regulated, but you can go on and promote these activities? So this is one of the first problems where we came together and say, okay, you people of international environmentalists, you need people from the anti-corruption, we need to stop this. The second problem is that, as we start looking at it, is that there's no transparency at all in the way these authorities are being appointed. Something that is common practices in the national level, we don't have it here. We don't know if the persons that are nominated either to represent the states or the Secretary General or the Experts Commission have any conflict of interest, or they even have the capacities to do these jobs. And I think this is an important problem that we should address. Of course, it is very, very problematic to have the operative organ dependent on the council, which carries directly the activities in the area, having also an enterprise that exploits that. That, of course, makes a lot of conflict of interest, a lot of problems on barriers on entry on the markets, and, of course, about corruption. So we think that the authority, this international authority, because it's quite unique, that it works in a market, it gives permits and it regulates, should have a much more firm and robust transparency and compliance policy. We need to know much more about the agreements between the transnational mining companies and, for example, the Pacific nations that ironically are the ones giving the permits and are the ones that first are going to disappear because of climate change. We have inadequate data collection processes. The environmental impact assessments are not transparent, and there are no clear rules of what the authorities should make transparent. And this is something very worrying. And we believe, as Angeles was saying, it is quite not the common practices in the national level. So we think we should bring this to the international level. Of course, we don't have reporting models, we don't have redressing social impacts rules, we don't have ways where how the authority has to address community complaints, and some of the suggestions is we should have Transparency International being part of the observers in the authority. They should submit or some kind of standards such as the EITI standards, for example, for mining. And of course, one of the things that worries the most is that there are no real rules about accountability. Who's going to be responsible for all these damages that these companies might cause and that the authority is permitting? There's no such ways for example, for previous consultation, when it's indigenous communities that are going to be the first affected from this. And of course, we have heard notices about states targeting already activists, or even the CBET authority trying to expel, for example, Greenpeace from the observers. So having this scheme for the wicked problem, we want to talk about a little bit what the solutions can be. And for that, we have here Stephen.
Thank you. So this is not the first time that we have seen an international problem without accountability, without oversight. You've heard from the other speakers, essentially a disaster heading toward humanity in ways that may be irreparable damage. We can look at existing anti-corruption laws and apply them right now to these processes. But before I get into the specific laws, we have a precedent, which is the Act to Prevent Pollution on Ships, which was an international treaty to stop ocean pollution on the high seas. Again, very similar. And the high seas are owned by all of humankind. And as it turns out, through a U.S. whistleblower law, the United States has become the #1 enforcer of this treaty, despite the fact that the pollution occurs on the high seas and the ships are not U.S. ships. This is the model we need to look at. Because if we are waiting for this council and the United Nations and all the conflicts of interest people to come together for oversight and accountability, we can just shoot ourselves to the moon. Now, here's where it begins. These are the companies that are getting the contracts. Guess what? They're all publicly traded. They're all under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. They're all under anti-bribery, money laundering laws. These laws will apply to how they interact with this entity. And to give you an example, under the Commodity Exchange Act, they have held that any corruption in the worldwide transactions of commodities on the commodities markets is market manipulation and can be held accountable. Well, this is all about commodities. It's all about potential bribery. And if you see this, some of these companies have already been found guilty under U.S. anti-corruption laws. Now, one that's not listed here is a company that is going to get some major contracts, which is Transocean. They're the ones who brought us the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Welcome to what's going to happen if there's no oversight. We'll see the next slide. So these are some of the laws that are currently applicable. The whistleblowers have the most advanced protections under these laws. The right to be anonymous and confidential, anti-retaliation protections, and the right to get a monetary award. These are the best transnational whistleblower laws ever approved. And they will be extremely applicable to this entity as long as the workers and the people involved are aware and the NGOs concerned about corruption and environmental protection engage. Next slide, if there is one.
Yes.
And this is essentially what needs to happen. It's fairly straightforward. Create proper mechanisms, create procedures. But guess what? As we fight and struggle to get the entity to do its job, we can look at existing laws to make sure that major acts of corruption are policed. And again, I just want to emphasize, I can't go into the detail on it, but if you think that under the Act to Prevent Pollution on Ships, the United States can be the #1 enforcer stopping ocean pollution, yet none of the pollution occurs in U.S. waters. The ships are not flagged out of the United States, and most of the owners are non-U.S. owners. So this is the concept of a transnational anti-corruption law that can be applied. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to all of the panelists. Now we're going to have a very quick Menti. If you can help us to, you just have to scan that QR, please. And you're going to see some questions. Please let me know if you are able to access the questions.
So what we're trying to do, just so you know, is we're trying to create a set of recommendations from experts as you, from the different areas, on what should the authority of the CBET do, but also, as Stephen was saying, what can we all do from our different points of view to really establish due diligence and compliance programs in these areas of extractive mining.
Okay, so you can, will you be able to access? Correct. So can you please, thank you. The next one, please. Next one.
This only explains what we just said.
The first question.
Otro más.
There you have. So can you help us to rank those things? We want, of course, that the authority has all of this, but we want to know the rank. In which place would you rank each of these? You just have to drag with your finger the options and put it on.
And while you're figuring that out, I just want to say one thing. What you heard from the panelists and what you see here is an entity that is a breeding ground for corruption because it has no real oversight that will be effective right now. This is what is needed to make it work. But will there be a will?
Yeah.
And will what they implement be effective? Mm-hmm. So that's what we're looking at. When you look at this situation, it is a breeding ground for corruption. And therefore, I believe the NGO and environmental communities need to be aggressive and use every legal tool at their disposal to prevent the catastrophes that are bound to occur.
Thank you very much.
We will.
Can we get to the second one? Thank you.
It's very hard to say.
Yes. So we'll be showing the results on how they are ranking them.
Oh, they're voting on which one?
The next one, please, Thomas. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
¿Aquí escogen?
This is ranking 2, right?
Okay.
No.
And if I could say one more thing.
Sure.
So while you're voting, just one other thing to think about. Why are large multinational corporations getting the contracts? Is there bribery? But why are companies that have a history of violating anti-corruption laws and a history of environmental problems, why are they getting the contracts? Where is the oversight? Where is the standards?
This is the third one. Please help us to rank these measures for preventing conflict of interests.
Which, as you can see, these are like common procedures when you're talking on the national level. And for us, it was quite extraordinary that there were no ways for people, for example, the different companies competing for or bidding for a contract where they could excuse or recuse someone when they think they have a conflict of interest. So,
I mean, that's like basic.
Yeah, it's like it's like 101 on any class of anti-corruption. So this is.
Thank you. The next one, please. So we think that all of this should be transparent, but we want to know, what do you think about the transparency of these reports?
And here there's been some discussions about if there are any proprietary rights on what you discover and what will be the incentives for someone to invest so much in exploring the seabed if they cannot have some rights over the things they do. So this is very important for us. We believe that if the seabed is of all humanity, then what they discover should be from all humanity. But this is debatable, and I think that that's why we put on this question.
This is another one. And here we're asking you also to help us with ranking the community participation mechanisms that we think that ISA should have.
And this is all about collaboration, what we've talked during all this week. No, what should be the role of the civil society, of ONGs in this? Right now, it's very little compared to many other organisms in the national level. They just can go to the council, but they are almost never heard. So I think this is an important element.
Thank you. This is almost the last one. Measures to strengthen transparency within the ISA. We do think that this is the minimum that the ISA should have, but we want to know what do you think about which one of these should be the first one and the most important one. Thank you.
Open data.
And to be fair with the International Seabed Authority, there have been some concerns about transparency. Many of the reports, many of the work of the International Seabed Authority has addressed these requests from NGOs, civil society, even states, that some procedures should be more transparent. But we believe that these answers are going to help us push forward with more specific and targeted recommendations on how these can be enhanced.
Thank you. The next one, please. Again, the elements of due diligence that enterprises that work with ISA should adhere to. We think that these are the minimum requirements. We want to know, what do you think about this subject? There's 8 or 9 questions.
9.
9? Good. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Whistleblower procedures. Again, we believe that these are the minimum that ISA should have, but please help us to rank them. Which one do you think that is most important?
And which one do you think viable also? Because it's always a challenge. This is not a state, so like.
Yes, anonymity. Yeah. Thank you. And this is the last one. Number 9. So recommendations to disqualify or sanction private corporations.
This is just what Stephen was saying. How come someone that has been sanctioned for so many times for corruption now is being granted these contracts?
Well, as Anel was saying, we're going to use this to give some recommendations directed to ISA. We're planning also to publish all this information in our site of the Transparency and Anti-Corruption Initiative of the TEC de Monterrey, maybe also at the National Whistleblower Center site. You're going to have access to the results, of course, and we have some time for you to give us some comments, your thoughts, or maybe questions that you have for the panelists, please. Yeah, we have one here. Thank you, lady. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I have 2 questions. So the first one is, does the ISA also control oil rigs that are in the area? And also, does the FCPA apply to bribery of international treaty organization officials?
Jorge, do you want to?
Yeah, I can take the first question. The mandate of the International Seabed Authority is very limited. Spatially, it only addresses the seabed and subsoil thereof of areas in the ocean beyond the control of states, beyond national jurisdiction. And according to this treaty that was mentioned before, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the International Seabed Authority only regulates minerals, mineral resources in any of their states, whether it's liquid, solid, or gas. And the convention at the time only knew the existence of polymetallic nodules. So this was the only specifically mentioned mineral that fell beyond the realm of ISA, but it stated that any other minerals could be included. That's why we know that there are cobalt-rich ferromanganese crust, the polymetallic sulfides, and we can also imagine whether there are any others, for example, rare earths. And these minerals, it wasn't clearly stated before, but they're quite essential for the energy transition. So many of these minerals and resources are used in the building or creation of those solar panels, for example, that can take the energy. So this adds a different layer of complexity to the issue, because if we want these minerals, we would probably need them from the seabed, but imagine all the environmental damage that can be done. But answering the question, it doesn't address oil and gas.
Thank you.
Bribery.
In regard to that, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act does cover bribery on international institutions. And furthermore, most likely the individuals who will be running these would be government employees appointed by various nations. So they'd be covered under that also. And as I mentioned before, the companies that are getting these contracts, all of the ones listed above, the major ones, are all publicly traded. So those companies are also covered under the transnational anti-bribery and whistleblower law.
Thank you, Steve. We had another question here. Thank you.
Thanks. Been so fruitful the talk, and on seeing how this the ISA, it's the regulatory and operational and technical in charge. How can we who's looking for the damage reparation? You know, as you say about the oil spilling in Mexico, it just happened. So regardless, the lack of accountability, whereas who should be in charge, if it should be the ISA, if it should be the states, and regarding as how Stephen told us to cease already existing laws that address transnational corruption, what would be the most effective jurisdiction for this accountability regarding an international body, you know? If we should go to national jurisdictions to address this transnational corruption, or where do we take it to, you know? And just as a quick point, Angeles opened the discussion on there's people missing on the conversation. At the hearing of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the first displaced community in Mexico said that they were the first ones, but not the last ones. And I think that we are not having these communities in the table, and we're not having also young people in the discussions.
Thank you. Anel or Stephen?
I will address the part on the human rights, and I completely agree with you. I think in the human rights area, we have evolved a lot on the idea of the right to a reparation, and I think it's not still very clear here. But right now we are talking about where to repair, I think I would go to an international court. Of course, Stephen's going to have a different idea, and I think this is what makes it interesting, no? Because in the United States, they have very effective ways that we could repair, but I think we should try both. And I completely agree, we need to have the communities and the vision of the human rights brought into these type of discussions.
So the laws that would be most applicable would be the Commodity Exchange Act, because it's all about commodities, foreign bribery law, and money laundering, because any dirty money that enters the financial system will be money laundering. So what has occurred is these laws are all U.S. laws. That is not the bad news, because they have created offices that accept claims worldwide and that cover non-U.S. persons equal to U.S. persons. So non-U.S. whistleblowers reporting crimes outside of the United States but covered under these laws, have obtained hundreds of millions of dollars actually in awards and full coverage. They can also take advantage of the anonymous and confidential reporting. So when I said that these laws have these advanced features, they're there. But there's two other twists here. Numerous international law enforcement agencies are now working with the United States, and we have a flyer and information. So countries' law enforcement. So let's assume there was corruption in South Africa. We now see that the South African authorities are working with the U.S. So this becomes critical. International cooperation, which this can occur either informally or the entity could push it and make it happen. But once you have the U.S. and the international law enforcement people cooperating, and you have a transnational structure, you have an effective anti-corruption program in place.
Thank you. We have here another question. Sorry.
I just wanted to add one more comment to Pablo's question on reparations and loss and damages. There is a loss and damages mechanism in UNCLOS, the international law that creates the International Seabed Authority. And it says that any of the profits that are gained through the enterprise, which is that company that doesn't exist yet, where ISA can create and gain funds from mining the seabed, any of those profits are supposed to be allocated and redistributed to the countries that are harmed from deep sea mining. And then the other component of how it's worked into UNCLOS is that a certain percentage of the area is called the reserved area, and those contracts are supposed to go to states that are considered developing nations in the contract. But what you saw from that chart that Steve had on his slide earlier is that 83% of the reserved area has already been allocated to states that are having these sponsorship arrangements with companies that are headquartered or based in the global north. And because the enterprise hasn't been established yet, they haven't instituted any regulations for the loss and damages fund that's supposed to exist under UNCLOS. So what was at the time a very revolutionary concept of reparations and loss and damage when UNCLOS was created has not gone into effect, and in fact the laws that they created to do so have been used to do the opposite.
Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been incredibly informative. So I want to know what kinds of environmental impacts can be expected from seabed exploitation that we can see back on the shore.
Jorge or Paulina, do you want to answer this question?
Well, let's start by saying that the problem of responsibility or international liability has to do with the causal nexus or with the causal link. So it's probably easier if we look at an oil spill and we see how this oil reaches the shore. While I'm not a biologist, I understand that the environmental services that the ocean provides are quite essential, for example, for the climate system as a whole, in the CO2 capture and regulating the temperatures of the ocean, etc. And there are very fragile ecosystems. For example, there are hydrothermal vents that we don't know much about them. So what is the damage going to be if we take out these non-living elements of the environment? How are they going to affect the living resources, the living species there? I'm no biologist, as I mentioned, but we probably don't have enough scientific knowledge to know exactly what is going to happen. But that should not be a restraint for humanity not to take action and not to prevent the damage. Under environmental law, one of the pillar concepts is prevention. So let's prevent damage. Let's not try and look at the reparation, at the loss and damages compensation funds. Let's try to prevent that damage from the start. So in the idea that all stakeholders and all the people with the knowledge should be invited. Of course, scientific knowledge and the scientific community is essential in knowing this part of the conversation.
But some of the parts that worry scientists the most, as if you saw in the video, first of all, they just go like, it's about 15 centimeters from the soil that they pick up. Most of these metal minerals have living species there that we still don't know exactly what they are. They will be picking up all the dead bodies, and those dead bodies consist a whole new ecosystem lives from those dead bodies that we'll be picking up. Once it comes up to the surface, as you saw, and this is a simulation because supposedly nobody can do it yet, when it comes to the surface and it's filtered and they take the minerals, as you see, when they put it back on the sea, they don't put it all the way down. So that diminishes light on the sea, and then there's a whole other ecosystem that might be affected with that. All of these are speculations, but I think there are red flags that we should be paying attention to.
Paulina.
Yeah, and with the same disclaimer as Jorge, that this is not my specific field, but as far as I understand, this is where, looking at the problem from different areas of law is useful, because what we know so far is you're altering the composition of the seabed, which for sure will have an impact on life there. We're not so sure how this will, show up at shore as you phrased it. And this is where the precautionary principle of environmental law becomes so important, is to the extent that we don't understand it yet, let's try to see to mitigate damage rather than try to repair it after.
Yeah, maybe you're too young, but we never thought that we're going to make a hole in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Right? And we did. Imagine what we're going to do on the seabed.
Yeah. I don't know if someone else has another question. Yes.
Yes.
Over there. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sophie Forsad, and I work for the German Development Corporation on extractives. And we have been looking at the topic of deep sea mining, and I think we just stand at a very important time, as you have pointed out. So we don't have time for that conversation, because if that regulation does not come into place and companies start extracting the minerals, and as I understood from biologists working on that topic, the damage is irreversible, because it's not like mining on the surface where you have maybe like 50 or 30 years or 100 years even so that it goes back, but you have literally 1 million years, or we don't even know. So what can we as actors do to support that claims? I think just as you had listed as well, like small islands, working together with the metals company, the topic of undue influence. But what can we do now? Because we literally have this time restrict of I think it's 1 year even. What can we act now? I don't know if you have so you gave a few recommendations, but some actions, be it increased awareness raising or looking more into that topic of anti-corruption. But yeah, just putting that question out there. Thank you.
Very important question.
Very.
What do you feel? What do you think?
Well, first off, right now, the people working on these issues in the companies, in their headquarters, on the ground, need to be fully aware of their right to report, that non-disclosure agreements do not apply in the context of our anti-corruption laws. Trade secrets do not apply. You can blow the whistle on that. They have regulations now known as ESG, which put requirements on publicly traded companies, and they all are, to meet certain environmental and governance standards. The issue is, and we have seen this across the board, is that people of good faith who would like to report do not understand that there are safe and effective ways to do it unless the ability to report is a rational action where someone doesn't have to give up their career, give up their freedom, give up their livelihood just to make a report. Then you're going to have a disaster. But the laws do exist. But there's a massive gap between what is known within the employment area, within the working force and the laws. And this is this gap that needs to be filled by the news media, NGOs, attorneys, academics, because it's in my view, it's the only way. Believe me, there are people in the headquarters of these companies in their quality assurance programs. They're scientists. They know what's occurring. Their financial people know what's occurring. But unless the code of silence is broken, we won't know, and we'll be paying for it.
Thank you. Paulina?
So, off the top of my head, I think in your question you mentioned two very important points. One is that this is happening now, so we have very little time for specific actions, and the question of awareness. Because on the first point, I believe that there's a myriad of international mechanisms that could be activated to try to tackle this issue, and to some extent they have already been, for example, by small islands, developing states requesting advisory opinions before international tribunals on the one hand. But we know that takes time and resources and planning. So alternatively, on more immediate things that we could do, it's a question of raising awareness. And we know that sometimes the most efficient ways of tackling this complex problems are from the ground up. So it's as civil society trying to move from the area of law to perhaps the area of policy, and then create awareness through the news, through conferences, through just making sure that this topic is part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Let me add something. If you remember from the structure of the International Seabed Authority, there is a council that is composed of 36 states. They come up from 4 different categories of states, so they get a particular representation within the International Seabed Authority. So the council is greatly related to the approval of the regulations. So what if it didn't pass there? What if the states that hold the vote to approve those regulations voted against it? Mm-hmm. Many states have increasingly followed the proposal of NGOs and have joined this moratorium. There's, for example, one state that calls for an absolute ban on these activities. While on the other hand, there are other states that say, well, let's base our opinion on the precautionary approach, and that's, for example, Mexico's position, who recently joined the moratorium. And if states are coherent, we can expect that if they say they are joining the moratorium, they will not vote in favor of these regulations within the International Seabed Authority. So concretely, one action that civil society or we can do is press or hold pressure to the governments to join this moratorium trend.
Yes, please, we have a question here. Thank you.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. I'm Irene Tellarista from El Universal. We would love to help you let more people know about this urgent cause, but I think even us that we report corruption in something that touches many citizens, like corruption in the health sector, we have so difficult to make people aware of what they can do. So how can we help you to bring this urgent issue to the awareness of the middle citizen? Like, how can we make them know why this is urgent and more what they can do? Like, what is the message that you want us to put out there?
Who wants to take this one? Anel.
Well, that's really interesting. And of course, when you are on the academia, this calling to action is always something that we need to learn from you, actually, not from journalists. I think what we need is you help us translate this. As you have seen, we made an enormous effort to bring a very complex concept, not only on the biology, on the science, and on the law, and then and then the idea of what individuals can do and what states can do. So I think it is a very complex thing that looks very far away. And of course, we need to make people more conscious about the cross incentives that these things have. I mean, as I was saying, it's very ironic that you have these little islands that are going to be the first affected, being the first to grant this. Well, we have to understand that they are so vulnerable in terms of being very poor countries, that it is very easy for a big corporation to pressure them. And in that sense, I think that what Stephen is saying, from the global north, from people that are more educated, that those companies are there. And the rule of law there is much more stronger. So we need those people to turn around and say, even if my iPhone and my iPad is not going to be so cool, or I'm not going to be able to change it every 6 months that the new one comes, what should we be doing up there? Even if it's not going to affect us, but maybe my grandchildren are going to be affected. And we really need you to help us translate this, because it is a very complex topic.
So one thing that a whistleblower can bring to the table is public awareness. Now, I don't know how many people are following issues with AI, artificial intelligence. That's been under development for years. But now all of a sudden, to the surface, people are reporting things like catastrophic outcome, the end of humankind. Biden then had to do a major executive order on AI, calling on every federal agency to start getting involved. Then a group of whistleblowers came forward and exposed that they were all being required to sign these restrictive non-disclosure agreements, which means someone's out there trying to hide things. And again, these are people working essentially at headquarters. In other words, and that's what you have. You see these major corporations here. The people who work there know the problem. They're studying this stuff. They know the liabilities. How do you get that information into the public space? And believe me, that will shock the people and push the governments to proper oversight. We see it time and again. And what's so interesting about this issue is there is still time. In other words, there is a push for moratoriums. There is awareness. This isn't like a catastrophe that has happened and we're trying just to clean it up. This is a catastrophe that can be prevented, and we know certain tools exist, which have been discussed here, pushing the states, working internally to get better regulations, but also going outside of those structures to get whistleblowers, to let them understand their rights, get it into the public space, and stop this from occurring. And I think this panel is saying something that's so important. They mentioned a year, but there's more than a year as long as there's a pushback, there's exposure. This is an issue that we don't have to lose.
Maybe you can also help us to talk about who the authority is. I remember the first time that I heard about it was the authority of the sea. And it sounded for me like God. Who's this? Literally, this is God? Or like who's this authority? So like to let the people, like the common people, regular people of the street, getting to know that there's someone, that there's a lot of people in this organization, the International Seabed Authority, and that they are responsible of a lot of things, and to start talking about them. And then the other thing is to ask, for instance, Transparency International and the International Anti-Corruption Conference to bring these people here, to bring this authority here. They should be here, at least listening. Maybe they don't want to be part of a panel. What are they going to say? We have a lot of corruption, we have a lot of conflict of interest. Okay, it's fine. But then at least listen to what we have to say. They should be here talking with us today, or at least listening to us. So hopefully, if you help us, they are going to listen. Well, I don't know if someone else has a question. Yes, go ahead. Yes, sure.
I just had another comment because I think that Ben's question of like what is the effect on land is the first reaction when people hear about deep sea mining and gets directly to your question of how do we make it matter, because the instinct tends to be when people hear about this and when companies frame deep sea mining as like this is how we're going to solve the demand for critical minerals, the instinct is always, well, why is it so bad? And there's lots of reasons, like in addition to the food chain and like ocean ecosystem issues that were mentioned, there's a lot of issues with carbon sequestration. Like there's a lot of carbon capture that happens with the minerals in the bottom of the ocean, and that's really critical for slowing global warming. And if less carbon capture happens, then ocean acidification increases, which is really harmful to the ecosystems and the fish supplies. But even when those explanations are offered, the next question that I think a lot of the kinds of people in this room ask is like, well, why does it matter to me if the fish supply in Papua New Guinea goes down? Like I in Washington, D.C. am not going to be affected if it's hard for indigenous fishing in Papua New Guinea. And I think the important message for journalists and for people who are trying to explain why this matters is to explain that this is just a new iteration of the same problem that we've seen with the intersection between corruption and colonization and environmental degradation, where, frankly, no other climate change issues are really, truly impacting folks in the global north in a tangible way either. Like, you know, we have access to the wealth and the resources to not be affected by hot temperatures or by, you know, desertification or any of the issues that are actually impacting people. And yet we ask this question as if, like, distancing ourselves from the problem is going to impact how we react. So I think that the important message is that it's not about whether it's going to be the end of the world for, you know, the people at IACC. The question is that there's a really extensive cover-up of what's going on for a reason, and it's because they're not complying with the environmental regulations. They don't know yet completely how it's affecting them, and what they do know, there's really scary things going on.
Well, I think that we don't have any more questions. So we're going to close this panel. Again, thanking you for being here. Stephen, yes, go ahead.
Go on, Stephen.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. I just want to thank everyone for answering the Menti, and if you could share it with your colleagues, we really want to have a lot of participation in it, so that could be it legitimize our opinions. It's not, you know, this professor and all these people here, but all of us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Anel. Sure, of course. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Anel, Jorge, Paulina, Gabi, Kathleen. Thank you very much. And see you soon. See you in 2 years. Hopefully, we're going to be together again in 2 years. I don't know where. And hopefully, ISA is going to be here to listen to us. Thank you.